So let's start off by addressing the elephant in the room. Yes, I have been generating my thumbnails with AI. I have absolutely no visual artistic skill, and I do not make enough money to afford to pay someone to make thumbnails for me. So subscribe. I'll hire an actual artist if I start making money with this. You've seen the ones I've made myself. They're awful. It's bad. I need help. I've been thinking about villain backstories and how they seem to have taken a wrong turn. Because villain backstories are really nothing new. They've existed since time immemorial. Some may say that Sauron is underdeveloped due to his lack of backstory. Those people don't know anything about the reams of paper Tolkien devoted to Sauron, and they probably work for Amazon. In the world of comic books, Joker is one of the few villains that just kind of shows up as a villain. But most of the villains have a good bit of their first appearance in a comic devoted to where they came from. And Batman 89 spends more time on Joker's origin than Batman's. All of the famous slashers have an origin story, but things are different now. Now we get these empathetic stories that seem to be designed to make us feel sorry for the villain. But these are just telling the story of where the villain came from, right? We've done that. So why does it feel different? A couple of reasons that I think writers need to start looking at and taking a serious look at. First off, you really need to ask yourself if you need a backstory at all. Hans Gruber in Die Hard is consistently listed with the greatest movie villains of all time, and you know nothing about him. You don't know what he was doing last week, much less anything about his childhood. That's because you don't need to. This isn't to say creating a backstory is a bad idea. Creating a backstory can only help you flesh out your character. You just need to determine if you should include it in the actual story that you give to your audience. You should ask yourself, is anything gained from the inclusion of a backstory? Usually, no, if the villain is after something standard. He's after money. Everyone wants money. He's just willing to do illegal stuff to get it. He's after power. Most people want power. He wants immortality. Humans have been after that for centuries. He wants to kill everyone on Earth and restart the population. Okay, that one's a little extreme. Some backstory might be needed, but how much? Again, it depends on what the character wants. In the case of most Bond villains who simply want to destroy the Earth, you usually don't need a backstory because the desire is so extreme. We understand that that is not a thing attempted by someone who simply had a psychotic break. In order to try and accomplish that kind of horror, it takes planning and resources the like of which most of us will never manage. To do that, you have to be wealthy, and most people with that level of wealth have to be pretty smart to achieve it. You may argue about inheritance, but even if you inherit an insane amount of money, you have to be pretty smart to not lose it. And really smart people usually have a reason for why they do things, even crazy things. Howard Hughes was a genius and the richest man in the world and insane, but he still had reasons. He was terrified of germs, and he thought that everything he did, like wear tissues on his feet, would protect him from them. So if a very intelligent person decides to recreate Noah's flood, he probably has a thought-out reason for doing so, rather than just wanting to see everyone die. So give that reason. And that's probably the only backstory he needs. We can call this the altruistic villain. He needs a goal that we can concede as noble, but also see being taken too far. He has this perfectly rational thought, which led him to a reasonable one, which led him to an acceptable one, to a shaky one, to a questionable one, to a bad one, and finally to Horror Town. His train of thought took a wrong switch, but the tracks were smooth the whole way. The operative in Serenity does what he does because he fervently believes that what he's doing will benefit the entire verse. So, a quick villain monologue for that villain type. So when do we need a backstory? One category is the eccentric or strange villain. Joker doesn't need a backstory because Joker is basically an animal, a wild thing that simply kills for fun and preys on the simple and the equally unhinged, but less charismatic. He dresses like a clown because he finds things funny and he laughs a lot. No muss, no fuss. The same thing with someone like Michael Myers. He kills because he's an angel of death, and his only backstory is to show that he always has been. Stories with villains like that are more man against nature than man against man conflicts. Like the simple motivation villains, we don't need backstory because we see how nature tries to kill us for no reason. But a villain like the Riddler, who has a compulsive need to make riddles everywhere and make puzzles his entire identity, see, that's kind of weird, and we'd like to know what makes a person do that. That requires explanation, so ask yourself, what has to be explained? Riddler's obsession with puzzles and need to prove that he's the smartest person in the room could use a little extrapolation, but we don't need much more detail. Also, if a character has a specific target, that target needs to be explained. Jason Voorhees drowned while teenage camp counselors were canoodling, so his mother Pamela Voorhees kills camp counselors when they canoodle. It gives us an explanation. Freddy Krueger kills the kids in one specific neighborhood. Why? Because their parents lynched him. Kind of fire was involved. Which brings to the other need for explanation, when your villain has special powers. That is a weird transition because Freddy's dream powers were actually completely unexplained until I think Elm Street 6. But you get my point. If your villain has some supernatural ability or circumstance, you should explain that. Unless it's already a fantasy or sci-fi setting, then we'll probably just accept magical sciencey stuff happened. An example, again, going back to Batman, because Bill Finger may have been the greatest villain creator in the history of writing, is Mr. Freeze. Batman is a fairly realistic setting as far as the world's technology goes. So when we have a man that has a freeze gun and has to live in a refrigerated suit, we'd like to know why. So it gets explained. That is the primary information we need from a backstory. But be careful what you're explaining, because that is where we've really started to go wrong. Are you explaining why someone is the type of evil that they are? Or are you explaining why they're evil at all? This is important because if you're explaining why they're evil, you need to make sure that's the right track for your story. If your story is about a detective trying to catch a cat burglar, and we spend a lot of time explaining why the cat burglar became a thief because his dad forced him to steal as a kid, and now it's all he knows, he just happens to be the best at it, it makes us feel conflicted about the detective catching him. And that can be fine if you're trying to tell a drama about the nature of justice and should society try to help people like the cat burglar or just lock them up. But if the point of your story is supposed to be hoping the thief is caught, why are you making us feel bad for him? And a lot of times it goes farther than that. If you focus too much on how a villain is a murderer because of his abusive father, you are implicitly saying this isn't the killer's fault. He bears no responsibility for his actions. He had no choice but to become a murderer because of his childhood. It's really the fault of the villain's father. Isn't it a tragedy that all of those co-eds died because the serial killer's dad beat him? When I was a kid and just starting in my writing, I did not have any desire to write Christian stories because I looked at most of the books and movies and knew, even as a kid, that they were bad. And I hated literature class, and I didn't want my stories to have any deeper meaning to torture future students with. A number of teachers told me I didn't really have a choice. I had to write Christian stories, and this felt like a threat to stifle my artistic expression, but they explained what they meant. It's very difficult for your worldview to not come out in your art, especially storytelling. If you believe something about how the world works, it will come up in presuppositions about the world your characters inhabit. This is Exhibit A, that they were right. A very common belief right now is that people are born good. No one is evil. Circumstances just warp people into doing bad things. Some go so far as to say evil doesn't even exist. Your worldview can lead you to subconscious decisions regarding your art, and that's what we're living in now. If you believe that no one is evil, then you can't just show a villain being a villain. You need to explain how they became that way. Most of these writers have daddy issues, so the father gets blamed pretty much every time. If it's the mom, it's because she's religious, which means it could also be the entire church the villain was forced to attend who's to blame. And the church is always homophobic, but that's more of a bonus fact because the character isn't gay, since showing a gay person as a villain would not be okay. But somehow the church's homophobia led to his bad deeds. Weirdly though, they don't notice that it leads them to the concept of original sin because, by their logic, the abuser couldn't have been born bad and must have had some kind of trauma in their past that led to their bad deeds. But that abuser must have had one as well, and so on, until we eventually get to what must have been the only actually bad person to ever live. Anyway, my problem with this worldview in this context isn't that I think it's incorrect, it's that it leads to crappy stories. One thing that most even decent stories accomplish is they give you something to root for. You want character A to accomplish goal B, and you intend to watch them accomplish that goal. Pick any good story and you can fill in the blanks without a problem. Frankly, that's an issue with the king and I can't fill in B. If your audience's desire is for Bob to accomplish his goal, and his goal is stop Craig from capturing Moose, but then about halfway through you show us that Craig really isn't bad for wanting to capture Moose, what are we supposed to do with that? You have taken away our ability to care about Bob's goal. But you may say, lots of stories give an extensive look at the villain's tragic backstory. The aforementioned Pamela Voorhees syndrome from The Incredibles. Darth freaking Vader had 3 movies devoted to his backstory. It can clearly be done well, so how can you know if you're doing it well or properly? All of the good villain backstories have one thing in common.
It's not an excuse. It's a reason.
If you haven't seen that movie, you should absolutely fix that. But that is the answer, and it is a nuance. Are you trying to evoke sympathy or empathy or just explain? Pamela Voorhees suffered a horrible tragedy. You feel bad for her, but you also know that indiscriminately killing horny teens that weren't born yet for the sin of being horny teens is wrong. It's her reason, it's not her excuse. The alternative, and what would probably happen now, is there'd be a flashback scene to the camp owners treating her cruelly over the reopening, or the new counselors mocking Jason's death in front of her, not knowing who she is, thus fueling her rage. Darth Vader is a special case because his arc is a redemption story, so you are supposed to feel bad for him. It's necessary to show why he turned evil, not as an explanation for the evil, but as an explanation for why he could turn good. So let's talk about Syndrome, because his takes way more thought. His story was he wanted to be a superhero, specifically Mr. Incredible's sidekick, a noble goal, but Mr. Incredible tells him absolutely not. This breaks Syndrome's heart, and he turns evil. So what is his desire? Even after becoming evil, he wants to be a superhero. That's fine, that's a noble goal, but not just any superhero, the best superhero.
I'll give them the most spectacular heroics anyone's ever seen!
Again, fine, but that reveals a flaw in his character that would have pre-existed Mr. Incredible's snubbing. If you want to be a superhero, that has a high likelihood of being based in a desire to help. If you want to be the best superhero, that probably means that you're in it not for the benefit of the world, but for your own glory. You could argue that this is an offshoot of wanting to prove Mr. Incredible wrong, but here's the thing about that. He didn't want to just be a sidekick. He wanted to be Mr. Incredible's sidekick. Why? Because he thought Mr. Incredible was the best superhero. He wanted to be teamed with and associated with the best from the very beginning, and it wasn't from a desire to help. It was a desire to be associated with greatness. Also, his desire to prove Mr. Incredible wrong was based on a chip he already had on his shoulder.
This is because I don't have powers, isn't it? Well, not every superhero has powers, you know. You can be super without them.
Mr. Incredible doesn't mention that fact even once. Could Mr. Incredible have trained the evil out of Buddy? Maybe, but not provable. We also understand that Mr. Incredible can't possibly train every potential supervillain to be good, and I'm sure he turned down a lot of sidekick requests made by kids that didn't turn into sociopaths. And there's also the chance that his training would have made Syndrome a better supervillain. So Syndrome wants to be the best superhero and prove that by defeating the greatest weapon in the world, which means it has to be able to defeat every hero but him. How can he know that without testing it on other superheroes and letting them die? And then, how can he be your hero without endangering thousands of lives? So his backstory is more of a reason for why he wants to do the specific thing he wants to do, not why he's a bad guy at all. There's also the thematic touch that it's the sins of Mr. Incredible's past, and it happened because of the character flaw he has to work through, which means that the blame lands on our hero, and he has to take responsibility for it rather than some nameless person in the background that we'll never see again. One further thing is, in the backstory, Buddy's annoying. He's clearly borderline stalking Mr. Incredible and trying to show Mr. Incredible he'd be a good sidekick. He doesn't listen when Mr. Incredible tries to stop him from leaving with a bomb attached to his cape, which leads to a villain escaping and causing one of the accidents that got superheroes banned from the world. Not exactly quality sidekick behavior, so we're on Mr. Incredible's side, and there's never anything to recontextualize all of those missteps, so we stand by his decision. Syndrome works for all of those reasons. What we have done recently is gone too hard in humanizing our villains. Yes, we want them to be realistic, and humans are complicated. But if you show us that our villain isn't really a villain, then our hero isn't really a hero either. And when you're watching a story with no hero and no villain, what are we even doing here? See you next time if you subscribe. Bye.